Hello and welcome everyone to Adam and Eve, the image of God and human origins. Some pretty heavy but important stuff. Two important questions I want to have us consider in this video. Number one, is it possible to both be made in God's image and to share common ancestry with all other life? Now, one misconception I want to hopefully clear up for those of us that might have certain assumptions about this issue. The mainstream modern scientific view is that humans share a common ancestor with the apes. So no one has ever suggested in the mainstream scientific community that humans evolved from monkeys. Rather, they would say monkeys, especially chimpanzees, are our closest cousins, our closest relatives, that we share together a common ancestor from this population. That's the argument, at least. Now, a little background here for the CRC view on this. In 1991, the CRC Synod, or the governing authority of that church, said one may not publicly teach or defend theories that suggest humans may have evolved from primates. You may privately research this, but publicly this is not to be taught. This is not to be really talked about. So question two then, how important of a role do Adam and Eve play in Christian doctrine as historical people who historically fell? In other words, can we talk about the reality of our sin, the need for humans to have a savior without a historical Adam and Eve? Now, Belgic Confession, Article 15, from one of the three forms of unity for Reformed churches, says, "We believe that by the disobedience of Adam, original sin, the inherited sinful condition, has been spread through the whole human race." So right here in one of the creeds, it does pretty strongly suggest Adam as the first historical person is necessary. In response, though, to an overture presented to Synod in 2010, they noted that Declaration F, that statement that said you may not publicly teach this stuff about human evolution, appears contradictory and confusing. And they actually declared 5 years ago now that it no longer be part of the CRC's official position statement on creation and science. Now, whether this kind of opened up the floodgates or whether it was coincidental, in 2010 and into 2011 as well, there was especially the beginning of a lot of controversy around this. So two religion professors from Calvin College published papers which questioned the existence of Adam and Eve. And this made national news. This is on NPR here. This was also another article example from MLive, Religion Professor's Departure. One of them resigned, was kind of pressured, it seemed like, to leave the college. That made national news. So let's go to the text itself then about the image of God and try to draw some meaning out of it. Genesis 1:26-28 is where this appears. And notice a couple of things. Notice, first of all, that God created male and female in his image, and that statement is bracketed by or framed by, go back a second, is framed by the command to fill the earth, to rule over it, to have dominion over every living thing. So over the sea, the fish of the sea, the birds, the livestock, everything that moves on the earth, we are put in charge of as image bearers of God. So those ideas definitely seem to connect together and belong together. And here's two ways of kind of summing this up then that I want you to think about. Being made in the image of God, as Genesis 1 suggests, means we are to be priests, number one, and we are to be rulers or kings, number two. That's part of the mystery of what it means to be made in the image of God. So a little bit more about each of those. We've already seen now in our analogy of creation being set up as a dwelling place for God, as his tabernacle or as his temple. A lot of connections there, right? Going through the details of Genesis 1 and the details for the instructions of setting up the tabernacle, there's a lot of parallels that hopefully you recall. And if that's the case, then as God's image bearers, we are to be the priests in this temple dwelling of the Lord. So the ability, the responsibility as priests to make God's presence accessible is what being made in God's image at least partly means. And to give voice to give expression to all of creation's praise and bring that back to God. Just like in ancient Israel, what was the job of the priest? It was to make God's presence known and accessible and relatable to everybody else. And it was to, on everybody else's behalf, offer up sacrifice and worship to God. So this might make sense then, especially of why in the Old Testament, think commandment number 2, do not make an idol, God says. Do not make for yourself an idol. Idols, images of gods, were often set up in these pagan gods' temples. Why does God not want idols? At least one of the reasons is because you and I represent God's image in God's temple as his priests. It's a pretty powerful thought. All of us together called to that role. And then secondly, we have the ability as God's image bearers and the responsibility to rule, to reign over creation as kings, developing its potential, continuing to create. There's new possibilities and new possibilities for culture and art and beauty to expand God's kingdom and his presence that way, and to take care of creation as God's stewards, as kings that protect what they've been given to rule over. And it's important to note then that all of us are made priests and rulers. Every single person, kind of a cheesy clip art, but hey, everybody, male, female, every nationality and race and ethnicity and language, everybody is made in the image of God. And that's a pretty powerful foundation, I think, in the Christian faith for racial equality, even though over the years and still presently we continue to do pretty poorly at that, sadly. It's an amazing foundation for working for more justice, racially especially. 2 questions then to wrap up. Does Genesis 1 ever connect the image of God to how God made us? Genesis 2 certainly talks about how God breathes into the dust to create Adam, the living being, the first man. But that's Genesis 2, and Genesis 2 never mentions the image of God. For that, we have to look at the passage we looked at earlier, Genesis 1, 26 to 28. In that passage, how God made us is not really a huge concern, so can we really connect that to what being made in God's image means? Secondly, does it ever connect the image of God, that as a concept, as a doctrine, to our physical appearance? Certainly, Jesus says in the Gospel of John, God is spirit. And if God is spirit, then at least in Genesis 1, when it talks about the image of God, there's not necessarily a primary connection to our physical appearance either. Being made as bodies, as part of a creation, a material physical world, is a good thing, right? Creation is good. Our bodies are good, and one day will be raised, just like Jesus' body was. But in terms of the body and how we look physically being part of how we bear God's image, if God is spirit, well, then that's not necessarily the way to maybe look for the answer either.